July 5th, 1943. The rolling plains near Kursk, Soviet Union. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, turning the dew-covered grass into a field of silver. In the shallow mist, the silhouettes of German panzers crouched like steel beasts. Engines rumbling, exhaust spitting black smoke into the cold morning air. Inside his Panzer IV, Oberleutnant Karl Meinhardt adjusted his headset. The sound of his crew's heavy breathing filled the cramped turret. "Steady," he muttered, gripping the periscope handles. "When the signal comes, we move fast. No mistakes." To the west, the thunder of artillery ignited. The sky flashed red as hundreds of German guns unleashed hell towards Soviet lines. The Operation Citadel had begun. It was meant to be the decisive strike, the blow that would cripple the Red Army and reclaim German dominance on the Eastern Front. But as the panzers rolled forward, the reality became clear. The earth trembled not just from German fire, but from something else, something vast and unending. Through the dust clouds, dark shapes emerged on the far ridge. T-34s. At first, they appeared few in number, their turrets glinting in the morning sun. But as the smoke cleared, more came into view. Dozens, then hundreds. Their diesel engines roared in unison, a deep metallic growl that seemed to shake the very air. "Mein Gott," whispered the gunner beside Meinhardt. "How many are there?" Karl said nothing. He could only stare as the Soviet tanks fanned out across the horizon, forming a steel wall that stretched farther than his eyes could see. It was not a battle line, it was a tide. And that tide was... The German formation advanced cautiously, their panzers moving in tight coordination across the uneven steppe. Dust clung to every surface. The smell of fuel and gun oil hung thick inside each vehicle. Ahead, the horizon shimmered and then erupted. The first salvo from Soviet artillery struck like thunder. Shells slammed into the earth, throwing dirt and twisted metal skyward. A Panzer III to Meinhardt's right vanished in a plume of fire. The radio crackled with overlapping screams. Tank 217 is hit. 217 is burning. "Keep moving." Karl barked, his throat dry. His gunner, Hans Weber, swung the turret toward a distant T-34 cresting the ridge. Target, 11 o'clock, 700 meters. The 75mm cannon fired. The shell streaked out and smashed into the T-34's frontal armor. Sparks flew, but the tank kept coming. Hit again. Another round fired. This time, the Soviet machine erupted in smoke and flame, its crew scrambling out as it burned. Yet even as it fell, 3 more emerged behind it. Then 5, then 10. It felt endless. The Soviet counterattack was like a flood of steel. The T-34s darted across the plains in coordinated waves, their sloped armor deflecting German shells that would have torn through lighter tanks. Behind them, the massive KV-1s lumbered forward, their thick armor nearly impervious to the standard German guns. "Reload! Reload, damn it!" Hans shouted, his voice cracking as he slammed another shell into the breach. Karl's hand shook as he aligned the sights again. Another target, another explosion, but for every tank they destroyed, 2 more took its place. The battlefield was chaos incarnate. Flames, smoke, and the endless roar of engines. German crews fought desperately, but their confidence began to crumble. For the first time, Karl realized something he couldn't admit aloud. The Soviets weren't just resisting. They were overwhelming. By midday, the summer sun blazed mercilessly over the Kursk salient. The air shimmered with heat and smoke. The smell of burning rubber and scorched flesh lingered over the plains, a grim reminder that this was no longer a battle of strategy, but survival. Meinhardt's Panzer IV crawled forward through the wreckage of destroyed tanks. Charred metal and twisted turrets littered the ground, German and Soviet alike. His commander's voice crackled over the radio, distorted by static and panic. "Panzergruppe Steiner, fall back to secondary line. Repeat, fall back." But retreating wasn't easy. Soviet Katyusha rockets screamed overhead, their banshee-like wails freezing men in terror seconds before impact. The earth shook as the explosions tore through the retreating German armor, flipping tanks like toys. "Driver, reverse." "Schnell!" Karl yelled. The Panzer lurched backward, treads grinding through debris. Through the narrow viewport, Karl caught sight of a Soviet T-34 closing in fast, its guns swiveling toward them. Fire! The German shell hit square on the turret. For a moment, the Soviet tank seemed to pause. Then it kept moving, smoke pouring from its side but undeterred. Another shell fired from the Panzer. This time, the T-34 erupted into flames. "Direct hit!" shouted Hans. But there was no time to celebrate. The horizon was still alive with movement. More Soviet armor, more flashes, more explosions. The Germans were outnumbered, outgunned, and now dangerously low on ammunition. Karl's voice trembled as he spoke into the radio. "We can't hold. There's too many of them. They just don't stop coming." The reply was grimly simple. "Hold your position as long as possible. Reinforcements are on the way." But Karl knew there would be no reinforcements strong enough to stem this tide. As he looked through the gun sight once more, he saw the unmistakable outline of another KV-1 advancing through the smoke. Its armor was blackened, its tracks half-shattered, yet it moved forward relentlessly, like a ghost that refused to die. The realization struck him cold. This wasn't a fight between armies anymore. It was a test of endurance, and the Soviets had more of everything. By late afternoon, the battlefield at Kursk had become a vision from hell. The once golden wheat fields were blackened craters filled with burning metal. Smoke blotted out the sun, turning the sky into a swirling, blood-red haze. Inside his tank, Oberleutnant Karl Meinhardt wiped soot from his eyes. The air inside was suffocating. Every breath stung his throat with fumes. Sweat dripped from his brow as his loader, Hans, coughed violently. The ammunition rack was nearly empty. "Only 3 rounds left, sir," Hans said weakly. Karl didn't respond. He could barely hear over the deafening crash of tank shells exploding around them. Through the periscope, he saw German armor retreating, not in formation, but in chaos. Panzers that had once advanced with clockwork precision now fled under the storm of Soviet fire. A Jagdpanzer beside them fired a desperate shot, striking a KV-1 square in the turret. It rocked back, but then impossibly kept advancing. Its thick armor shrugged off the blow like a scratch. The KV's gun flashed once, and the German tank vanished in a burst of flame. Karl's heart pounded. "We're pulling back." "Move," he shouted to his driver. But the Panzer's treads were jammed, locked by shrapnel and mud. The engine roared uselessly. In the distance, waves of T-34s were rolling through smoke like predators closing in. Their outlines shimmered, their guns turning toward every remaining German tank. The roar of their engines grew louder, a mechanical thunder that crushed any remaining sense of hope. Hans stared at Karl, fear written all over his soot-streaked face. "Sir, how many more do they have?" Karl looked out across the field, an endless line of Soviet tanks stretching toward the horizon. He whispered, barely audible, "Too many." Moments later, a shell exploded nearby, flipping the Panzer onto its side. Inside, chaos erupted, screams, smoke, fire. Karl hit his head, his vision spinning. Through the broken hatch, he saw Soviet soldiers advancing alongside their tanks, red flags fluttering through the haze. As consciousness faded, one last thought echoed through his mind. The Germans had reached their limit. The Eastern Front would never be won. When Karl awoke, the world was silent except for the crackle of distant fires. The once roaring battlefield was now a graveyard of machines, blackened hulls, and twisted metal scattered as far as he could see. Smoke drifted lazily across the plains, carrying with it the bitter scent of fuel and death. He crawled out of the overturned Panzer, his body aching, uniform torn and burned. Around him lay the remains of his crew. Hans slumped against the wreckage, lifeless. The war had claimed them all, but somehow Karl still breathed. In the distance, columns of Soviet armor rolled steadily onward. Their T-34s, though battered and scarred, kept moving with a grim, unstoppable rhythm. Red Army soldiers followed behind, rifles in hand, stepping over the corpses of both friend and foe without hesitation. Karl watched in disbelief. The sheer number of tanks was beyond comprehension. It was as if the earth itself had given birth to an army of steel. Each time one fell, another took its place. And behind them, more were coming, always more. He stumbled to his knees, the weight of realization crushing him. The Wehrmacht's pride, its vaunted panzers and tactics, had met their match, not in brilliance, but in endurance. The Soviets had fought with something the Germans could never match: endless resources, unbreakable will, and a determination born from defending their homeland. Weeks later, reports confirmed what Karl already knew in his heart. Operation Citadel had failed. The dream of conquering the East was dead. Kursk had marked the turning point. From this moment forward, the German army would only retreat. Years later, veterans of the Eastern Front would recall that battle with haunted eyes. They spoke of waves of T-34s that seemed to rise from the smoke itself, of tanks that never seemed to end. And for men like Oberleutnant Karl Meinhardt, Kursk would forever remain the day they realized the truth. Germany could win battles, but it could never win the East. The Battle of Kursk wasn't just another clash of tanks. It was the moment the tide turned forever. The German dream of victory in the East was buried beneath waves of Soviet steel. History remembers it not for who advanced, but for who endured. If you found this story as gripping as we did, make sure to like, subscribe, and join us next time as we uncover more untold moments from the war that shaped our world, right here on America in Time.